NFL Week 8 Betting Market Outlook. I'm Brett Matthew at Deep Value Better with my co-host Judah Fortgang at Throw the Damn Ball. We're live from Dime Square. It's foggy, rainy, dreary. Fall's definitely coming. Kind of reminds me of our Week 7 performance. We went 2-3 in our Circa contests, lost on the Jags, Dolphins, and brutally lost on the Patriots. And then we got some winners with the Bengals and the Chiefs. We outperformed the market in Circa. Something we were talking about, maybe it was last week or the week prior, talking about how the market has just been uncanny in its outperformance year to date, and how that was only a matter of time before it came back down to earth. And that happened in Week 7. 1-4 for the market. Lions was the number one pick, followed by the Jags. That was really our only overlap, our only on-market play. Bucs was the third most popular pick. Niners, the fourth most popular pick. So we had a nice fade there, nice alpha play. And the only winner for the market was the Jets. So we got that one game of alpha. Now on a year-to-date basis, we are 19-15-1. The market is also 19-15-1. So hanging on. Rainy, foggy, dreary Week 7 in Circa, but absolutely crushed it in live. One of our most successful weeks to date, certainly in the afternoon slate. Really started to buy hard on the Chiefs. We had some pretty sharp pregame plays. The whole thesis there was to fade the sell-off, really, on the Chiefs. Once again, big time matchup for the Chiefs. Market sells off on the Chiefs, buying the other side. And we were buying some pretty out of the money, deep -6s, -7s, expecting the Chiefs to really erupt offensively and to take advantage of that overpriced Niners defense. So we came into the game with those positions in our back pocket already, plus 300s, plus 400s. And then we leaned even further into the Chiefs as they went down 3-zip, as they went down 10-zip. And as we know, they came roaring back, scoring touchdowns on the last 7 drives of the game. Definitively crushed the Niners on the road. And this is one of the things I really want to pat ourselves on the back for, because we see all these charts and all these things that come out on Twitter and stuff, like basically, it was so obvious. It was so obvious the Chiefs are going to come back. Look at Patrick Mahomes' record when they're down a touchdown or more, or even double digits. It was obvious. It's never that obvious in the moment. Otherwise, everyone would have just ripped the faces off the sports books live betting. In which we did. We had the moxie, right. We had the plan, we had the script.
And we timed it.
Decisiveness.
Yeah. Perfect execution. Your description of New York really fits the scene, which is as it starts to get a little cold, a little cloudy, a little dreary, and our Circa picks felt that way. Yeah. The live betting, I think, it's almost representative of what football represents when it's dark and cold and dreary, which is almost the light in the winter.
I know you're also very optimistic, more optimistic than I was when we came into October, the month of raininess, dreariness, fogginess. And since October started, we are 6-8-1 in Circa. So it's one of the things that we'll get into. We're releasing for the first time our drive quality power rankings. Again, backwards looking, not necessarily forward looking, but one of the things that you wanted to point out too, Judah, was on a back tested basis actually demonstrated predictiveness. So they're backwards looking, but they do have value on a forward looking basis, at least on a back tested perspective.
Yeah, like insofar.
And that has the Bengals number 2. Very provocative.
Look, it's provocative, but I think it almost cuts through any sort of narrative and really is just taking strictly performance and how well teams move the ball on the field. And it's not saying this is like the definitive capital T truth, but it's a good base to kind of start your analysis from.
So when we think about week 7 and we look at our drive quality scoreboard, again, our model assigns earned points based on quality of drive, and that's going to be independent of any scoring outcome or non-scoring outcome. And the intention here is just to give us a better sense of how these teams really performed. Anything stick out to you on this scoreboard that may be a bit surprising? I would say something that sticks out to me is like Washington outperformed the Packers more so. The Texans were closer to the Raiders than the real scoreboard suggests.
That's a procedural point also that's important, which is when we put out metrics about drive quality to measure team efficiency, we're using on a drive-by-drive metric, right? Saying per drive, how good is this team? Drive quality is very valuable. One thing it doesn't incorporate is something like a pick six, right? So the Raiders and Cardinals, for instance, Cardinals had 2 pick sixes, the Raiders had 1. So their score is going to show up a little bit lower, but that doesn't necessarily mean they played worse of the game. We just have to be mindful of the, I don't want to say failure, but like a limitation, specifically of the scoreboard, which is something like a pick six is not going to show up. So the Texans scored just by virtue of having more drives, even though they weren't necessarily more efficient per drive, is going to show up higher.
Yeah, although what I would point out is, again, when we look at our TWAM metric, time-weighted average margin, can give you a sense of how competitive that team was and indicative of our drive quality score between the Raiders and Texans. Time-weighted average margin for the Texans was just -2 points.
Yeah.
For the Lions, just -1 point, which suggests that game was much closer than it was the final score. And we know that because the Cowboys didn't really pull away really until the end there. And in fact, the Lions were winning 6-3.
Yeah.
At halftime?
Yep.
Certainly early in that game. Time-weighted average win probability, even for the Cowboys, was just 57%. So certainly not indicative of winning by 3 touchdowns, though our drive quality still suggesting the Cowboys certainly outperformed the Lions on a fundamental perspective, on a drive-by-drive basis perspective. Another thing I want to look at is earned points over realized in totality on a season-to-date basis for a team like the Giants, just to quantify the eye test of what everyone knows, and we'll see it in our consensus market power ranks as well. The Giants still aren't meaningfully moving up despite being 6-1, but time-weighted average margin, again, we saw this last week, -1. Time-weighted average win probability for the Giants, 42%. But we don't want to completely dismiss it as well, because the drive quality from an earned points perspective, Giants still did beat the Jags.
Yep.
Browns, time-weighted average margin, -1 point.
And the Chiefs-Niners, in my mind, it was like, okay, Niners got off to an early lead, and it was just all Chiefs. That's not really representative of what happened. It's like 58% the Chiefs and like 42 for the Niners. I think that was a pretty close game until the end. Yeah, it took a while for the Chiefs to kind of pull away.
Yeah, I mean, it was just 14-13 even at half. And I remember there were some few plays there in the second half where even the Niners were just still within one score. And then just one more huge play by the Chiefs that kind of just extended it. This is one of the reasons why we have our drive quality earned points, the time-weighted average margin, and the time average win probability all together, because it comes at it at different angles to give you a broader sense, because they're not all telling you the same thing. Because a huge weakness of the time average weighted win probability is it bakes in a ton of assumptions around that win probability in itself, which can be totally inaccurate sometimes. And then the time-weighted average margin really totally discounts, again, a strong team potentially at the end of the game just asserting its will. And we know fourth quarters can be very important in really separating a good team from a bad team. And the time-weighted average margin is not going to necessarily take that into consideration. And then that's why we have the earned points as well, take into consideration the strength of each individual drive.
Yeah.
And so they all come at it from different angles. And that's why you want to see all three of these at the same time to really give you a sense of how well that team performed in totality.
Yeah.
When we look at our Week 8 consensus market power rankings, from the market perspective, Bills still there at the top. justifiably so, had the week off. So you shouldn't expect to see much movement. Although ESPN, from their perspective, did. They're enamored with the Chiefs unexpectedly blowing out the Niners. And so they upgraded them and downgraded the Bills. From the market consensus perspective, you still have Bills at number 1, Chiefs number 2, Eagles number 3, Cowboys 4th, followed by the Bengals to round out the top 5. And then you have Bucs, Niners, Ravens, Vikings, Packers to round out the top 10.
Why 6 through 11 just makes no sense to me at all. And that we're still on the Bucs.
You can tell the market's still on the Bucs because now they're favorites.
This line genuinely makes no sense to me. And I think it's one of those pricings where we're not going to see such a fundamental gap between market pricing and my fundamental view of the team.
When we look at the Bucs too, the standard deviation, that is basically going to give you a sense of how volatile our industry analysts' perspective of this team. And we can see it's relatively low, except our drive quality, which this doesn't take it into consideration. Our drive quality has the Bucs ranked 19th. A huge separation from how the market is viewing the Bucs right now. ESPN has them at 7, PFF 4, 538 8th, Football Outsiders 8th, and InPredict at 8th. Drive quality 19th. Huge delta. And that could be signal. You definitely had a great game plan coming in, called out to bet the Panthers money line. As soon as we started our game trade live stream, your first trade idea was like, let's lean into the Panthers plus 500, plus 475, with the expectation that the Bucs are just overrated and that the Panthers can't possibly be as bad. And that was the particularly great call. And this is one of the things I really want to take advantage of from these market rankings as well, is what I wish we would have had the Panthers in Circa at plus 13. Because one of the things we should take advantage of, last week, it was unanimous across the board that the Panthers were the worst team. So it agrees the Panthers are the worst team. Take advantage of that.
Yeah.
But what that's telling you, for all intents and purposes, is that the market's likely going to overshoot to the downside then in how they price the Panthers. It's going to be overly aggressive to the downside. And could have been a two-sided handicap because we want to fade the Bucs on the other side. So that was a win. That was a win.
Something I guess interestingly added this week to this chart is by seeing the delta of what InPredict is saying, aka the actual spreads of the game, as opposed to what the general market says.
If you want to briefly talk about a difference between how ESPN, etc., are coming up with their power rankings and how InPredict is.
Okay, so ESPN has their model, right? It's FPI. PFF has their model, PFF Greenline. 538 has theirs, and Football Outsiders is basically taking their kind of qualitative analytical framework. InPredict is just taking the Vegas spreads of the games for all the look-ahead lines and more specifically weighting the line for this particular week. So it's just using the spread line. It's not using any priors or any other metric, as would ESPN, PFF, and 538. So that's really important in understanding what's being priced in the games, because that's the market of InPredict as opposed to in ESPN, PFF, and 538. What I find interesting about the delta there is that, like, in theory, the ESPN, PFF, 538 Football Outsiders of the world are going to represent a more consensus, probably sharper view of what each team actually is. And InPredict is just the pricing here and now, because spreads are taking
in this specific matchup.
In this matchup, exactly. That's the key point. That spreads are not just the fundamental value. In the same way that power rankings are just a fundamental value, spreads are accounting for home field advantage, injuries, different matchup angles. That's all being baked into a price. And it's common for people to say, oh, the spread is a representative of fundamental value. And the two are definitely correlated, but they're not the same thing. Right, and I think that's represented by the delta and the differences between our other market indicators and the InPredict.
Yeah, and that's why this week, for those who are watching on the stream or watching on YouTube post hoc, is we have this new column in our Week 8 Consensus Market Power Rankings, InPredict Diff, which is essentially the difference between the InPredict ranking and the market consensus ranking. And that difference should give us a sense of how is the market pricing this team for this week's matchup today relative to this broader macro outlook consensus ranking of this team. And that's how you can look at in predict as micro, the market consensus power ranking as broader macro. And so we want to get a sense of how that potentially could be too focused on the short term and ignoring potentially some of the longer term insights. And one of the things we really want to compare this to is the drive quality power rankings as well. And so we can see some of those biggest changes, some of those biggest differences between in predict, again, looking short term relative to market consensus power rank, long term. Some of the biggest differences is how they're ranking Titans, Giants, Seahawks, Cowboys, Saints, Cardinals, Ravens, Colts this week is some of those biggest deltas.
Yeah. The Titans one, I think, goes to show the market's being about Ryan Tannehill's injury. And it's almost a shame because this is something I think we can take advantage of, this delta, but that the Giants and Seahawks are playing each other is a little unfortunate because it kind of diminishes the value there.
I love it when people join the Game Trade live betting sessions that we have, because the bigger community that we have, the more intelligence, kind of collective intelligence that we can have. And Darnell, I know you called out when we were trying to angle into some live money line bets on the Chiefs. You called out that bookmaker had the plus 200, the DraftKings had the plus 150. And so obviously we want to try to get the best prices possible. The more eyes we have on the market, the better we can do. And you calling out that plus 200 was huge for us, especially since it cashed. But also one of the things I wanted to look at too is the 1 week change. So what were the biggest 1 week changers on the market power rankings? Giants upgraded 5 spots. Sounds fair, especially since they were so low. They were 26th last week. Now they're still only 21st, sitting at 6-1. Standard deviation 4.7. So big disagreements across the board. Our drive quality actually has them pretty high, ranked 12th. ESPN 19th, PFF 21st, 538 20th. Football Outsiders relatively high at 14th. But the market's still not buying in to the Giants. Bears upgraded just 2 spots and another flurry of 2s and 1s. And then from a downgrade perspective, Colts were downgraded 5 spots, losing versus Titans, and also Matt Ryan, no longer the starter. And that might have negative connotation, at least here in the short term. But I know when I was looking at PFF grades as well, Matt Ryan was ranked 33rd. There's only 32 teams.
You can't get much worse than Matt Ryan.
Yeah, so you can't get much worse than Matt Ryan. Now, I guess you technically can still get worse.
True.
Bellinger may be worse in the short term, but I know what some of the things where people were calling out is he definitely is a lot more mobile than Matt Ryan. Pretty much anybody would be more mobile than Matt Ryan. And so that could mitigate some of the offensive line weaknesses, etc. But he certainly doesn't have the experience, wisdom, judgment that Matt Ryan does. Chargers downgraded 4 spots. Arjun's Chargers downgraded 4 spots. Falcons downgraded 4 spots. Patriots downgraded 3. Our Jaguars downgraded 3. We bet the Jaguars now 4 weeks out of the 7. And I think we're 0-4 betting the Jags. Huge disagreement. Is this the biggest disagreement? The biggest disagreement. Standard deviation, 9.3 spots. That's the volatility of the Jags. 9.3 spots. Our drive quality has them at 6. No wonder we've loved them so much on a season-to-day basis. And maybe we just been early. So maybe we have to lean into them again. ESPN 13, PFF 27, 538, 31. Whew. Football Outsiders 9. Just massive disagreement there. Another team that the market really disagrees on is the Seahawks at 9.2 standard deviation. Our drive quality, 8th. ESPN 25th. PFF 28, 538. Relatively high, 11. And Football Outsiders has been a little bit ahead of this. So I know even weeks ago, Football Outsiders did have the Seahawks at ranked 10th in predict 23. And then some of the unanimous Bills, Eagles, Chiefs, pretty much market consensus agreement that those are top 3 teams. Also, a big agreement that Washington sucks. Consensus agreement that Washington is the 25th best team. And one of the standard deviation why I think this is important, because this is essentially, again, isolating where there's the most disagreement in the market and how to evaluate these teams. That's where you can get alpha, where you can get value. The thing is, you have to be directionally right on it, on that bet. But basically what this says is there's going to be noise in pricing these teams with high standard deviations and potentially low standard deviations if you think that the market's wrong. Also, one last thing I would say is the largest year-to-date change so far in the consensus market power rankings perspective is the Chargers, right there with the Colts. The Colts is clearly everyone's soured on the Colts, but the Chargers are one of those teams that people are holding on to.
I'm curious if you think that's the biggest change. I'm going to guess no. Going the other way. I was going to say the Seahawks. I forgot about the Cowboys.
True.
It's the Cowboys. We had the whole Cooper Rush thing. But I was gonna ask if you thought the Seahawks, and we should actually talk about this. This was something I was really thinking hard about after watching Seahawks Chargers. Maybe I'm overreacting of really questioning first principles. Of we must be missing something with the Seahawks. Well, Geno Smith, DK Metcalf's being carted off, and Geno Smith is throwing dimes to Marquise Goodwin in the end zone. He's throwing dig routes on 3rd and 10 consistently. He's clearly successful. Something's going right in Seattle. And Justin Herbert looked terrible. And that's, team's really hurt. He wasn't playing particularly well, right? And even his PFF grade, which should in theory isolate a lot of that. As I'm at 17, he hasn't been overly impressive. Kind of had me questioning, what do the Seahawks have going on there? We all thought that, Pete Carroll was the disaster. Russell Wilson was saving him. And the evidence this year is the exact opposite. That something's going on in Seattle. It led me to question, okay, maybe there is something to really having a successful run game. Maybe that does establish certain offenses. There might not be a causal relationship or a statistical relationship, but there are certain cases where that might be true. And even have me questioning things like, how much do we know about quarterback evaluation? How certain should we be that quarterbacks are necessarily always a product of the first couple of years? Geno Smith coming out of nowhere 8 years later, it just had me questioning a lot of different principles about what I thought was true about football, about quarterback play, about his work with the passing game, about head coaching.
Also opportunity. Geno Smith, he's been in the league, you say 8 years or whatever, but 6 of those years he was just basically sitting on the bench. Didn't really get an opportunity.
Yeah,
but
that's what I'm saying.
Play.
Yeah, how much do certain players need opportunities to show? How much can we decide? People are talking about it, but I don't think it's really comprehending how valuable this is. Geno Smith was the consensus joke of the league coming into the season. Pete Carroll was a joke of the league.
I think he was the favorite to lose his job. It was plus 400.
Yeah.
Especially with Drew Lock in there, a lot of competition.
That's
now, instead, he's the 4th ranked quarterback on PFF grade.
Yeah.
On the season.
And that really passes the sniff test. The dude is throwing absolute lasers. It's unbelievable.
If you came in with 0 priors, you had no idea who Geno Smith was at the beginning of the year, and you were just watching him, you would think he's a top 5 quarterback.
Yep, that's true. And I think there are certain contextual factors and really understanding how much context plays a role. But I think it plants the seeds of questioning first principles about what are successful team building ways and what actually matters most for success in the NFL in 2022.
And it also speaks to keeping an open mind, especially when you don't have a litany of data on a particular player who's legitimately justifiably proven who he is. Someone like Mitch Trubisky, I feel again, he's got 40 starts under his belt. You have a sufficient amount of data to really understand what type of quarterback this is. He's still relatively young. Could he grow and mature? Maybe. But you could feel your confidence level of trying to handicap Mitch Trubisky in any given game could be relatively high. Whereas if we thought we knew who Geno Smith was, and maybe still is, it's not we never necessarily know who he is now.
Yeah, that's an important and good way of sharpening the point, which is that we should always build in a tails of any possibility happening. Yes. That's really the key point.
Just like with games, with players. Yeah.
I think it really illustrates the point that we're talking with human beings here at the end of the day, and there are too many things we just can't account for. We have to have some humility and understanding that we can't quantify everything, and we should build in a possibility that there are tails on both ends. Right, we need to build that in always.
Darnell's talking about narratives. I think also this is one thing we've talked about numerous times, is trying to get a hold on what's the narrative of this player, of this game, of this matchup. And sometimes narratives are very strong and very loud, and that can help you get a sense of what's being priced into the efficacy of this player or the strength of this matchup or which way, what, and the other. And I don't know if you necessarily just want to blindly fade narratives, But you want to understand, like, all right, is this narrative being overpriced or underpriced? And trying to evaluate where to exploit mispriced risks, mispriced evaluations. And one of the things I lament a little bit is, we talked about this on past streams too, is we've been right about a lot of like long-term theses. Seahawks is definitely one that we've not been right about. We haven't really taken advantage of any of these juicy Seahawks spreads on the season. Another thing I would love for like off-season research as well is basically what I'm thinking about is this whiplash effect of week 1 and week 2, because everyone talks about week 1. Oh, and then week 2 overreactions. All right. What about week 3 whiplash, which is one of the reasons, like week 1, Seahawks outperformed, beat the Broncos. They didn't look great doing it, but Geno Smith did show flashes in that game where people were like, whoa, is this a new quarterback? Is this something we need to take into consideration? And then you have week 2, they suck, they look bad, they get blown out versus the Niners. And okay, no, week 1 was the noise, this was the signal. And then that week 2, that confirmation, that's what takes hold then in like a lot of people's minds. If Geno went back-to-back good performances, then that would have helped.
Yeah.
But it's because the next whiplash, that second week, then for the next 3, 4, 5 weeks, it's basically, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Like, it can't be this good. And it's like that week 2, that whiplash effect hangs on. And you need the follow through for that narrative to hold. And that's something I would really like to look into is this whiplash effect. Let's get into week 8. Thursday night football game, Ravens Buccaneers. This opened Ravens -1, creeped up to Ravens -1.5, and now it's flipped over the last 24 hours down to Bucs -1. We've been selling the Bucs hard the last couple of weeks, especially last week, largely due to you, Judah. And we can tell from the market consensus power rankings that the market isn't fully selling off on the Bucs, downgraded only 2 spots, downgraded only 4 spots on the year-to-date basis, and they're sitting at 3 and 4.
They're not just
and
sitting
looking ugly doing it.
You don't accidentally lose to Pittsburgh and Carolina, right? As opposed to like fluky losses where the other team played their best game, a la Indianapolis. That's the key point. Understanding what's being priced. Like the Ravens are a top 10 team for sure, and the market's pricing them at like 5th or 6th. But we're just still hanging on to the Tampa narrative that they're like going to kind of turn back the clock. And I think there are really good and legitimate reasons to fade them and say, no, this team's different. Something that really stood out to me as part of my research, which is looking at perfectly covered plays, something we studied at PFF this summer, is as much about the offense as it is the defense, right? It's your scheme plays a huge role in that. Arizona consistently shows up as a team where defense is perfectly covering them. Scheme plays a role, and receivers getting open also plays an important role, not to mention, of course, the actual quality of the defense you're facing. And there are 50% of the passing plays are perfectly covered. The base rate is a negative 0.3 EPA. That is, the Carolina Panthers, the worst NFL offense this year, are a negative 0.15 EPA. Right? That's twice as bad as the Panthers. That's 50% of the plays, just as a baseline. Right? That's a structural issue. That's not being fixed. Not to mention, this has been like ad nauseum. People talked about the early down runs, but just like on drives where the team runs the ball over expected on early downs, their EPA is negative 0.24. Again, way worse than the Carolina Panthers offense this year. When they throw, it's 0.06. And like we've seen the videos of Byron Leftwich just being like, no, we're going to keep executing. He's shown no willingness to adapt at all. I just don't see what's going to magically fix and turn around Tampa offense. The fact that his name is Tom Brady, as if we didn't have priced in that like he wasn't as good without Antonio Brown, is going to miss Rob Gronkowski. Mike Evans is hobbled. Oh, and by the way, the entire defense is really hurt. Sean Murphy bummed things out. They can't stop the run. The Panthers ran all over them last week. The Ravens are finally getting their run game back going. I just don't get this pricing at all.
I think Antoine Winfield is also banged up.
The whole defense is hurt. The defense was the only saving grace for this team.
One of the things I wanted to point out, this cool graphic from Established to Run, the guy that I've worked with, Michael Heary, he put this one together. And one of the things that stuck out to me here is this is looking at pass rate over expected. And it's highlighting Bengals Falcons, but for the purposes of this matchup, is there's this everyone knows like, the Bucs keep running the ball on first down at inopportune times, and it's setting up them behind the sticks. But on a PROE perspective, the Bucs are still 4. And this kind of and they're still not being successful.
It's true.
But there's a narrative the Bucs just need to pass it more. And maybe they do need to pass more on first down specifically. But we can see if this gives you a sense to time series of it. And the Bucs have been in the top 5, top 10 in pass rate over expectation for the last 4 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a solution to say the Bucs just need to pass more. To your point, their wide receivers aren't getting open. Not getting any separation.
If you're passing into perfect coverage, it's a disaster. You're doomed to fail.
So does that mean we're betting the Ravens?
We are putting them in Circa.
So that means we got to get it in. We got to basically finalize this.
You're right.
Tomorrow.
I'm just realizing this now. I can look like an absolute fool, and Tampa can turn back the clock. But based on everything I know and all of my handicapping skills, but again, sports is random. Anything can happen.
Yeah.
This is such a slam dunk.
Also, the Bucs have been downgraded 4 spots, again, on a year-to-date basis. The Ravens have been downgraded 5 spots on a year-to-date basis. The market has lost more romance for the Ravens than they have the Bucs. In fact, again, looking at the standard deviation, the Bucs, it's a pretty unanimous, like 1.7 standard deviation. So just 1.7 spots of disagreement across industry analysts. Ravens standard deviation is 4. So wider disagreement on how good the Ravens are. And I think both those numbers should be flipped. Our drive quality has the Ravens ranked 5th. Again, Bucs 19th. So this would certainly justify a bet on the Ravens at +1.
Let's say we'll look back at this and say the Ravens are like the 7th best team and the Bucs are 22nd. Right? We just don't see mispricings like that. It's huge. It's like imagine like the Bengals being 1-point underdogs against the Commanders right now. That's almost the equivalent.
Loved the Chiefs, pounding the table on the Chiefs versus the Bucs a couple weeks ago, and the market was buying the Bucs then too.
Yeah,
and you said basically you were just absorbing the line.
I love it. I love this. I love it when I can source exactly what's being priced in, and I know what's being priced in. Right now, I have good data points. This is just the exact opposite. Like, the wheels are really going to come off if they lose to the Ravens this week.
I think in the Chiefs-Bucs, too, we knew there was, like, an influential bettor who was giving that line movement some momentum. Are you aware of any of that in this instance?
I haven't seen any of that.
I haven't seen that as well, either. Yeah, I mean, again, it's the NFL. Let's just 30 seconds here before we close on this game. Again, we know this is the NFL. The Bears just destroyed the Patriots by 3 touchdowns in New England. Anything can happen.
Exactly.
So how do the Bucs win this game? This has to be more like Ravens mistakes, like they something great around Lamar Jackson.
There's always just like the random variance game, but that's a cop-out of an answer. The way they win this game is like they turn back the clock. All of a sudden, they're not throwing into perfect coverage always. Brady looks good, and he's spiking throws left and right. The Ravens are banged up.
And Ravens' secondary has been exploitable.
It's exploitable, and, like, it's still Tom Brady. And you talked about this last week. Like, you can always price in a ceiling, even if their floor is really low right now. So, like, the case for why they win is they play like the 2021-2020 team, which the market is pricing in as an assumption, as opposed to, I'm saying, as a tail, like a left tail possibility. That's the key. That's the key difference.
And on a PFF grades perspective, PFF still has Tom Brady as top 6.
And I just posted a graph, and like he's playing very well, despite his circumstances. But just the circumstances are so bad, there's only so much you can do.
And so we're saying basically when he's not really passing the eye test and he's not helping the team win games, despite being still a top 6 quarterback, and we're saying it's largely an outcome of play calling, running predictably, and the wide receivers aren't getting any separation.
Yeah.
Maybe they do get separation versus the Ravens.
Yeah.
And maybe they change up play calling.
It's more than just separation and more than just play calling, it's play design. That's really incorporated in the perfect coverage stuff.
And so can they fix that on a short week?
Yeah. Given Byron Leftwich's commentary, I don't think so. He's very adamant. His inflexibility. Right? They this is how we do it. We're the football guys, and we want to execute our game plan.
And for those who aren't aware, Byron Leftwich press conference a couple days ago, or maybe it was last week, but it seemed like he wasn't aware of what EPA was.
And Ian suggested that he does not care at all about how they're running the ball.
All right, Broncos at the Jags, our favorite team. Under a field goal now. It was 3, I think maybe even 3.5 for a little bit. Now Russell Wilson is going to play.
In London.
London. Yep, huge X factor there. And the Broncos defense continues to play elite. From a market perspective, Broncos are way down. They're 24th. Downgraded just 1 spot from last week. Downgraded 10 spots on a year-to-date basis. Standard deviation 5.7 spots. Even drive quality has them at 22.
Which is driven almost entirely by the defense. Offensively, they're 31st best. But defensively, are number 1.
So are you betting the Jags again?
I think
so. Are you going to take a break? You're going to take a break?
It's hard. Yeah. I'm not sure whether to really just lean in or there's something we're missing in the Jaguars circumstance. My gut says to lean in here to the Jags.
Just so mistake laden.
So mistake, but it's in the kind that you don't think will continue. It doesn't seem repeatable. That's what's so frustrating. There was one bad penalty. Penalties seem like something that's more repeatable. It's like a lack of discipline. I don't think Travis Etienne's going to fumble on the 5-yard line again. I don't think they're going to continue to fail another 4th and 1. One
of these charts that I really liked from Anthony Reinhardt, he puts out some good stuff. But basically, he was looking at EPA gained and lost due to penalties. It can give you a sense of teams that are shooting themselves in the foot. They're either poorly coached or whatnot, and they're committing a lot of penalties. The way I interpret this is then who have gotten lucky on a week-to-week basis and penalties have actually helped them from the other side. Because I don't think you can really necessarily do anything to make the other side commit penalties. The Broncos are one of the most penalized teams from a perspective of actually it damaging them the most. So that's another reason not to lean in to a team like the Broncos. Saints are also there. Seahawks also one of the most penalized teams, and Jets. And then the Jags are relatively average.
The game on the margins like this, below 3, head coaching I think really makes a difference, especially with the low total on defenses. I trust Doug Peterson way more to manage the clock well, manage the game situation more than I do Nathaniel Hackett.
Oh, sure. I saw some odds who's the next coach to be fired. I think Nathaniel Hackett is the...
Yeah, I think you lean into the numbers, and I'd rather bet on a better offense beating a defense than vice versa. Defense is fragile.
Patriots, -2.5. On the road at the Jets. I'm actually very surprised by this line movement. Patriots was -1 before the game. So I bet the Patriots on a look ahead. And this line's moved up from 1 to 2.5 despite the Patriots looking like crap versus the Bears. Looks like they're going back to Mac Jones. You had predicted when we were live betting that game that you thought they were going to go back between Zappe and Jones. And actually, from what I read, that was actually Bill Belichick's intention.
Yeah.
But they ended up not doing that.
Yeah, but I think they're definitively going with Jones. Zappe looked definitively bad. To pull the plug there.
Yeah, outside of those first 2 drives.
This game, it's true. If you held the same handicap you did against the Bears, for the Patriots, that is, mistake-prone quarterback, I don't see why you should jump off ship just because it failed there, especially when factoring in, it's well documented at this point, that Belichick defense is really struggling against quarterbacks who can scramble. I think it's almost the same situation we had last week. Zach Wilson really prone to mistakes. I'd run it back here with the Patriots. Right, the take with the Packers game was partially to sell the Packers and also buying Zach Wilson. He played okay in his first couple games back. He's been dreadful since then. Right, I have nothing to say he's going to be a good quarterback there. Breece Hall's out, and you want to attack the Patriots on the ground. I'm not sure James Robinson's going to be caught up to speed, and if it is, it's not the same. I don't see, we're getting 2.5 points here. We're getting 8.5 in Chicago. I think it's a very similar handicap, and I think that was a sharp handicap too. It just didn't come to.
Yeah, I wonder from a props perspective. We really like Mike LaFleur as an OC.
True.
I wonder if they've seen how Lamar Jackson played against the Patriots defense, how Justin Fields played against it. Wilson's got legs.
Yeah.
I mean, he can certainly run the ball. If they try to scheme some intended run designs for Wilson, and if some like Wilson rushing props.
That's something to monitor a lot.
Also, I forgot who tweeted this out, but it was one of those blatant observations of like, which makes me feel a little stupid betting the Patriots at -8 versus the Bears, is the Patriots were +10 versus the Packers just a couple weeks ago, and then they're -8 versus the Bears. Now, both those games may have been mispriced. Like, the Patriots probably should never have been +10.5. That was mispriced.
Right.
And that was another thing, again, like trying to take advantage of how we're observing how these teams are moving in these consensus market power rankings. One of the things we mentioned last week was like, oh, and now the Patriots like snuck into the top 10. Like, this has been a massive climbing the ladder over the course of the season, and maybe feeling a little toppy now. That's my only part. Again, I still don't hate the bet, because again, like Bailey Zappi threw that 1 second touchdown, the Patriots went up 14-10. We wanted to get more Patriots. They're about to run away with it.
Exactly. And I think, again, the room for error with bad offenses is very high, especially without the ground game going. I just don't see the Jets as being able to put up a ton of points, which leaves room for error. Leaves room for some stalled drives. I was going to say also, like, you look at the Bears' numbers, they're not so bad. The reputation is far worse than they're actually playing. That's another key thing that's not being sourced in. They're like 19th in EPA, 21st in drive quality on offense. They're not that bad. They're not a train wreck, which I thought they were early in the season.
And that's a good point, in the sense of, again, this is why I think I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago when Arjun was on, was so many people post some really great charts, but very few times do I see somebody post a time series of something, and to see how something is evolving over time instead of just points in time. Oh, this is just the most recent state of affairs. And the Bears, to your point, just keep inching up, even when they've lost games, and now it's coming through.
Yeah.
Okay, Steelers +10.5 at the Eagles. We're going to get into one of the first big lines for this week. One of the things I wanted to lament from last week as well is there were some big lines, and something we've been talking about is the parity of this league this year. And I think you were talking about how you don't even anticipate there really to be any big lines this year, because they're not going to be justified.
Yeah.
And so we got a couple this week in Steelers +10.5 interstate rivalry. The Steelers are another one of those teams who, again, they're not good, but besides that Bills game where they clearly played the best team in the world, they're not getting blown out.
Yeah, you took the two things I was going to highlight: the Battle of Pennsylvania and these big spreads. And also the Eagles have a tendency to let teams back in. It's something we've capitalized on all year. The angle that gives me pause here, and what makes me uncomfortable from a Circa perspective, is like Kenny Pickett is throwing way too many interceptions, and they're not fluky tip balls or whatever, where like the Eagles might walk their way to extending leads just because Kenny Pickett's turning the ball over so much.
You definitely can't bet the Eagles, though. That's for sure. Not this year. I think the only teams you can possibly bet over 10, and it's actually maybe just one team. It's just the Bills.
Bills and
you can't even do it. You can't even do the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I can't bet the Chiefs not minus double digits.
The Eagles are not a team that can consistently cover 10.5 point spreads.
Dolphins at the Lions. Dolphins -3.5. This was -3. I know on the look ahead because I bet it. Dolphins -3. I was surprised that this hasn't crept up. One of the reasons why I bet that look ahead line at -3 was because I was anticipating this to creep up maybe by 6 by kickoff, especially if the Dolphins looked good, which they didn't. So that was part of it that missed. But the Lions didn't necessarily look good either. Although they did hang around.
But that was a factor. That was a factor of the Cowboys. And that's a factor of the Cowboys not getting going on offense. The Lions look dreadful. They haven't gotten offense going in the last 3 weeks. Granted, DeAndre Swift might be back, and St. Brown was apparently taken out for a concussion, even though he didn't have a concussion. But there are some clear matchup angles in this one that really have me on Dolphins, which is talk about man coverage a lot and how the Dolphins are particularly sensitive to it. The Lions play the highest rate of man coverage. Their corners are a disaster. By a metric I've built called successful coverage over expected, their free starting corners are all in the bottom 10 percentile of corners. Not a recipe for success going up against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And as we've said numerous times, man coverage really reflects the talent that is exactly right, Darnell. I was going to suggest building our favorite same-game parlay with Hill, Waddle, and Tua, which almost cashed for me on something that looked good in the first quarter and a half. So I think the man coverage does not allows the talent to play out, which clearly Miami has the talent advantage here. And the other thing is that Jared Goff is an absolute train wreck against the blitz. I posted this graph earlier tonight, and the Dolphins blitz 40% of the time fourth in the NFL, where I think it almost continues the trend of the Lions really struggling on offense. And we can start to see, this is what makes it very attractive on the alt line, is the Dolphins can really extend just by virtue of how bad the Detroit defense is, and some pretty clear matchup angles in their favor going up against the Detroit offense.
The total in this is 51.5. So this is the biggest total on the board this week. So definitely leaning into an SGP like that with Tua, Hill, Waddle definitely makes sense. And obviously there's one of the worst defenses in the NFL, if not the worst. But the Dolphins defense, you mentioned this a couple weeks ago, was the market wasn't necessarily taking into consideration, wasn't appreciating the injury status and the depth of the injuries for the Dolphins. Their defense is banged up.
It's extremely banged up. They basically just have Xavier Howard. But the good news is they're going up against the Lions team that has one good wide receiver. And again, we're playing man coverage here. Man coverage is going to let the talent play out.
Yeah, and the pressure on Goff, that was one of the reasons why we didn't even flirt with taking Lions last week. Again, Lions was the number one pick in Circa. It wasn't even something we even thought about. And it was primarily almost a single angle handicap, which was Goff plays historically bad under pressure, and the Cowboys get pressure.
Yeah.
But I wish we would have taken the Cowboys then. Although, actually, I'm glad
we live bet. Cowboys. That's fine.
Yeah,
The Cowboys did Dak's first game back from injury.
Fine. No, and that's exactly how you wanted to exploit the Cowboys, was them starting off slow and betting them live. Which we did, which I actually forgot about because it took so long for it to come around. Like we were leaning into the Cowboys when they were down, getting them at attractive prices. But then I mentally started to write them off because I was also betting Cowboys alt lines, like deep out of the money alt lines, -7.5, -9.5. Again, and -13.5. I bet the Cowboys. Yeah, and all those cast. It actually, in fact, until you reminded me now, is like that was actually a big winner of ours. Cardinals +3.5. At Minnesota. This was 6 on the look ahead. Again, I don't know all the look ahead lines, but I know the Cardinals were 6 on the look ahead because I bet the Cardinals +6. And this has come all the way down to +3.5. I don't know if that's necessarily justified that big of a movement. Obviously, the Cardinals won big on Thursday Night Football, have 10 days rest. Minnesota was on the bye, right?
Yeah.
So they haven't played for a long time, kind of out of sight, out of mind. But yeah, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, this is the one I wrote up for PFF as one of my higher conviction plays of the week. We talk all the time about sourcing information and sourcing market pricing. And I think this is a good example of something that I should be priced in, but is not priced in. The Cardinals have been a disaster on scripted plays. We've taken advantage of that many times.
Yeah.
Last year, DeAndre Hopkins had the highest yards per route run on scripted plays, and the highest PFF grade on scripted plays, which makes sense considering the chemistry and plays designed specifically for Hopkins to get open.
Sure.
So it is, right, if DeAndre Hopkins comes back to a team like the Chiefs, they're diminishing returns because they're already so good. We have increasing returns here because they're so bad on the scripted plays, which is they'll be fine, and they've been fine after the scripted plays. They just need to get better on scripted plays for their offense to start working. And I think Hopkins, aside from making their whole offense better, really has this kind of increasing returns effect early on in the game. Not to mention, if you look at our drive quality stuff, if you look at EPA, if you look at our general team efficiency, the Vikings are, I think, 15th, 16th. Everything's league average on their front. I think the Cardinals are also like that. Yet the market, and this is again going back to what we were saying earlier about Impredict, pricing the Vikings. It's the 9th best team, and the Cardinals is the 16th best team, but I think they're trending in opposite directions. Also, not to mention, the Vikings have played no one good. Their only good opponent was a The Eagles team they lost 23-7 to. Maybe they beat the Packers 23-7. They got blown out by the Eagles on Monday Night Football. But like all of a sudden their win against the Packers doesn't seem so impressive.
No.
They barely squeaked by against the Teddy Bridgewater, Skylar Thompson Dolphins. All their wins are one score against the Lutz London game. They barely hung out to beat the Bears. Like, they don't have any impressive wins. They haven't done anything to impress. And the same angle we had for Goff and the Lions. The team third in blitz percentage in the NFL is the Cardinals. And one of the only quarterbacks worse than Jared Goff against the blitz is Kirk Cousins. His EPA against the blitz is negative 0.21. Again, far worse than the Carolina Panthers offense. That's like 40% of the plays. That's a huge percentage of the plays. They're matchup angles. I think they're fundamental angles, and I don't think the market's fully pricing in the return of Hopkins in the way they should.
I like that. And there was some speculation around, or skepticism really, around how much the Cardinals would try to use Hopkins in game one. And already they were forcing
I forgot
the ball.
Yeah, I forgot one key part here, which is that Hopkins was used in the slot 27 times on Thursday Night Football, which was 17 more than any other game he's played against the Cardinals. The slot cornerback for the Vikings, 103rd out of 112th in PFF grade, allowing the highest CPA per target, whether it's a slot cornerback or safety, whoever's covering that position. It's been a disaster for them. And we know that Kyler Murray has a tendency, if he needs to just hook onto one target. DeAndre Hopkins had a 48% target share last week. He can continue to press that advantage. And Hopkins can get 15 extremely efficient targets in this game.
So what were your bets?
I bet minus 5.5.
I just love like the balls it takes to like bet something like, because I think I was even laughing when we were on the game trade live stream, and I'm like, oh, like Jesus, Chiefs are out to plus 6.5. And you're like, what about minus 6.5? A full 2 touchdowns.
Just wait to see the receipts on the Ravens Bucs game.
Yeah. Oh, but again, betting these deep out of the money bets, these huge plus money bets. This is how at the end of last Sunday, again, we went 2-3 in Circa. We lost a lot of bets. On a percentage basis, we probably lost way more bets than we won.
Yeah.
From a P&L perspective, we crushed because we have all these moonshots. So you only need to win a fourth or a third of your bets because you're playing into the volatility that we all know is very apparent in the NFL. And this is the benefit of leveraging this betting strategy is you don't need to hit 55%. You don't need to hit 52%. You don't need to hit 40%. Sometimes maybe you don't even need to hit 30%. What was your percentage? I thought it was like, 22%?
I was like 10-21 for 126% ROI. That's a disastrous percentage.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, like, it felt bad. Just, man, we're losing a lot. But the ones that you win just blow all the losses out of the water.
Yeah, like what I just outlined is 33% win rate for an ROI of 106. Well, that speaks to the kinds of bets that I make and the value of all lines.
And this is the new wave. This is the new wave of betting. The things that we're doing, the things that we're talking about, our strategies. Again, it's not even applicable to somebody who doesn't live bet, really. Or also doesn't have the risk tolerance or the foresight, the broader macro view, and to feel comfortable with that type of risk profile.
Yeah.
This is the future, though. Bears at Cowboys. Bears plus 9.5. This was 10.5, so it's come through that 10. Notable. Obviously, the Bears looked awesome versus the Patriots. Cowboys looked kind of like a wet blanket versus the Lions, as we've talked about. What are your thoughts on this one? Are the Bears still mispriced?
I like betting this game live.
Yeah.
Something I saw last Monday was that plays where Fields would generally take sacks, he was scrambling out of them consistently. Now, I'm not sure if that was a one-off. It's lucky, and they certainly were designing more runs to Fields. I want to see, is he taking sacks? Is the offense going to stall like it has for basically the first year and a half of his starting tenure? Or did something click last Monday where they were telling Fields, look for the runs as much as possible. We're going to design runs for you, and this could be a different offense. So I want to monitor that. If Fields is running well, I do think this is fundamentally mispriced. But at the same time, the Cowboys are so good at getting pressure, but they're third in the NFL in pressure rate. And Fields was so bad under pressure and against the blitz in his career. I'm definitely not betting it before the game actually plays, and we can start to have some data points.
I wonder what Fields props are going to look like this week, given that he's had a couple games in a row now, some pretty impressive rushing prowess.
Yeah, the Bears have not been playing as bad as their reputation would suggest.
I think Fields' rush yards could still be too low, because I was very familiar with it last week because, we bet Bears first quarter, given that they were really good in the upper echelon of scripted plays.
By the way, same thing this week. They're much better than the Cowboys scripted. So I would recommend a first quarter bet.
One of the things also that we did, which was a unique strategy, something that I think we should continue to look into and to try to leverage at every opportunity, was the Bears first quarter money line is like plus 220.
Yeah, 220.
But if you switched on DraftKings, switched the same game parlay on, it boosted it to like plus 310. And so all you had to do was just match it with something that you felt very confident in. And I combined it with 3 different bets. One of the high conviction bets didn't cash, which was Patriots minus 1.5.
That's what I did too. That makes it better.
But that pushed it out to like plus 550.
Yeah.
But the other ones that I combined it with was Fields rush yards, which pushed that out to about plus 550.
Yeah.
And then I combined it with Bears over 9.5 points, which was like plus 470.
Also, if you wanted to, you could ratio it to get the actual odds to 260 and take both sides. If you just took like Patriots money line, Bears money line, along with the first quarter bet, you can grab both sides.
Yeah.
That's something that's guaranteed to be higher than 220.
But this is just something to look into, especially if you have DraftKings account, is if you like a bet and you just flip the same game parlay on and try to match it up with something very high conviction, you could get a demonstrably better bet. Going from essentially plus 210 to 310. That's huge. Huge. That's insane premium to be captured there. So again, being creative with your bet construction. Raiders at the Saints, Raiders minus 1.5, over under 49.5. This is another one of the larger totals on the board. The Saints defense continues just to give up points and points and points. And the Raiders offense certainly looking better over time, definitely leveraging Josh Jacobs. Been a renaissance. Ran all over the Texans.
And the Raiders are third in our draft quality metric. They're top 10 in both passing and rushing EPA, as you said. They're finding multiple ways to kind of win on offense. Their defense is atrocious, though.
Market Power Rank has the Raiders 14th. Our drive quality has them as 11th. The public is hot on them, though. ESPN has the Raiders ranked 6th. That is too hot.
Much too hot. I don't know. It's not a game I want to bet.
Is it going to be Andy Dalton still?
Yeah, they named to start. 3rd in PFF grade, by the way. So far, he's playing well. There's injuries.
In that Thursday night game, they were just gushing over how good Andy Dalton had played until those 2 pick sixes. But according to our drive quality scoreboard, Saints on an earned points basis outperformed the Cardinals. And if Dalton doesn't throw those 2 pick sixes, Saints probably win. And then the narrative around these teams change.
True.
But you had a game you want to necessarily pregame.
No.
Bets. Panthers at the Falcons. Panthers plus 4. This was plus 6, plus 6.5, which seemed, a little bit too long. Still one of the worst teams in the league. Have a reputable defense, something that we already knew. Still being led by PJ Walker, who is known to put in a good performance from time to time. I talked about on the previous streams double-digit underdogs to the Cardinals last year, just like they were double-digit underdogs to the Bucs. And the Panthers steamrolled the Cardinals by 20, 30 points, just like they did versus the Bucs. And then they came back the next week. They were repriced at 4-point favorites, and they ended up losing straight up. But the Falcons are now a favorite. That's not necessarily, at least historically this season, the place where they're racking up these ATS wins.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of noise across Twitter, really disappointed, ourselves included, around how the Falcons mismanaged that massive deficit to the Bengals.
Yeah.
Not throwing the ball, not taking advantage of Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and the other weapons at their disposal, and instead running the ball at a 60% clip. We bet Mariota over pass attempts when they had that big deficit with the anticipation that they would throw the ball more. It makes sense. And you love Arthur Smith. You've talked about how you've liked Arthur Smith.
I like his very narrow
play design.
Yeah, this strikes me as one of those spots that I was accustomed to earlier in the season of just ugly teams. I don't want to get myself involved here. And the Falcons' defense we talked about, they're okay until the injuries start coming. And we saw that come really to fruition last week. And that's new. So I'm not ready to back the Falcons on those grounds. And I'm certainly not backing the Panthers with PJ Walker at quarterback in a 4-point spread.
Yeah, and this is still a team who is pretty demonstrably trying to tank. Now, of course, there's players on the field still playing for contracts. They're still playing for their own reputations. They're still playing to justify their existence in the league. So they themselves aren't tanking on the field. But the Panthers cannot blow this team up this year and then end up going 6-11 and end up getting like the 12th pick or something.
True.
But yeah, at the same time, one of the things we don't want to do is bet bad teams versus bad teams. Especially in a secondary that's banged up that we called out is something that we don't want to lean into. Yeah.
Speaking of spots I don't want to lean into, Titans, Texans. I don't even know who's my quarterback for the Titans.
I think it's going to be Tannehill from what I've heard.
I would assume Tannehill, but the fact that this went from 4 to 2 is a little bit surprising, especially considering the general market has downgraded the Texans to basically a unanimous 32nd best team, which I don't agree with.
True.
At the standard deviation of 1.5, not a lot.
Hey, you're right. I mean, it's 31, 29, 29, 30, 32nd, 32nd.
Yeah.
It's pretty much across the board, yeah.
And I don't think...
Downgraded 2 spots last week when they hung around with the Raiders for 3/4 of that game.
Yep.
We talked about the time-weighted average win. The time-weighted average margin was -1 point.
On the live stream, I was talking about how I thought it was coin flips to the finish, which is why I wasn't getting off my bet. The Titans, they don't have the ability to pull away. They're good scripted. Always the first quarter bet is in play, and the live unders in play with the Titans. But I don't see them being able to pull away. And the Texans are pesky. They're very pesky.
Sounds like a perfect live bet of waiting for the Titans to get a lead because they're elite at scripted plays, those first 2 drives, taking that early lead. But the Texans hang around. And the Titans actually play, not only do they really play really well in the scripted plays, but then on the opposite side, as some of your charts have demonstrated, they're like one of the worst teams after that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the spot to lean into rather than bet anything before the game.
Yes, yeah. I don't want to touch this game from a pregame perspective, but that's the game plan for this. Titans up 7-zip, Titans up 10-zip. Bet the Texans plus double digits potentially, and just wait for the Titans lead to bleed over the course of the game. Giants plus 3 in Seattle. 2 teams blowing away market expectations. The market's starting to believe in the Seahawks, still not believing in the Giants. Mostly because the Giants aren't doing it in any pretty way. The Seahawks kind of look good as they're doing it. Defies the eyes. But the Giants are confirming the eye test. They don't look good, but they keep squeaking out these wins.
Yeah, it's an interesting frame. I think this is the first time I've had this where my handicap is I don't want to bet against either of the teams.
And it's in Seattle. In Seattle. Historically a tough place to play.
And I don't want to be going up against the Giants are doing something funky, which I think is better than the market. Geno Smith's playing at a top 5 level. We have to kind of price in that. I don't want to bet against the Seahawks, and I don't want to bet against the Giants. High standard deviations on both fronts, especially the Seahawks side.
Yeah.
And our draft quality has this 12-8.
And to my point, just to quantify, the Seahawks have been upgraded 13 spots from our market perspective on a year-to-date basis. But the Giants just 5.
Yeah.
Despite the Giants being 6-1, the Seahawks are not 6-1. Seahawks are what? 4-3.
Yeah.
Commanders plus 2.5 at the Colts. Plus 2.5, plus 100. Taylor Heineke versus Sam Ehlinger.
Another spot I'm laying off for pregame stuff. only because two ugly teams. We don't have a lot of data on them either with Heineke and Ellinger. Scripted angle, though, both these teams among the absolutely worst on scripted plays, but get a little better, closer to 20-22 range after the scripted plays, which lends itself to a good game over. But why would I bet 2.5? So many unknowns. Two bad teams.
Yeah, and despite the Commanders, the Washington football team beating the Packers, it was mostly on the ground. It was not a Taylor Heineke. I feel like he's getting a lot of the credit, but negative 0.03 EPA per play, 5.6 ADOT, negative 3% CPOE. Like, he did not play well. No. This was all on the running game.
And he's going to chuck a bunch of balls up to Terry McLaurin a couple times a game, and one of them is going to hit.
Niners, minus 1.5 in LA. Going to be a lot of Niners fans, if not all Niners fans. Niners have owned the Rams. Definitely recently. Except for the playoffs.
Still going to give me nightmares.
Everyone was leaning into the Rams last time these teams met in San Francisco. Niners really took advantage of the Rams' banged-up offensive line. The Rams' offensive line is getting healthier, but still not good, even if it is healthy. And the Niners' defense is getting healthier. I want to buy the Niners. Keep leaning into this trend. Maybe here's a signal: is the Rams continue to be ranked way too high.
Yeah, that's what I was about to get at. And this is something I highlighted in the reflection note in week 4, and that's coming out tomorrow. It's unbelievably slow to downgrade the NFC teams from last year. The Bucs, the Packers, the Rams, they've been bad. Something that's deeply troubling for the Rams side is that on plays when they're expected to throw, when there's a 70% expectation of them throwing, the Rams break the scale of being bad. At a negative 0.4 EPA. They can't throw, protect. This is bad. It's just like we're hanging on to the Super Bowl prior. Our drive quality has them at 16th, not 11th. What was the spread last week against Kansas City?
Yeah, Niners are -1.
It wasn't as if the Niners played terribly, especially offensively. The Chiefs are the Chiefs. They're going to put up 45. That's what happens. We're going to react to that and say the Rams are the same quality of team. That's crazy. It's a bad mispricing. Added the fact that the Niners have owned the Rams in the Shanahan McVay years.
Yeah, no, I think also you'd think that McCaffrey's going to be looped into the game plan way more so.
Sure.
Been showed a few flashes, basically just going out there and playing backyard football. So run that way. Yeah. Here's the football and just do something.
Yeah. And there's a kind of bias of why we didn't see the Rams last week. And we're downgrading everyone else because it's just an NFL season of downgrading. And the Rams didn't play, so we don't have that.
So basically, they moved up 2 spots basically just on a relative basis because everyone else was down.
You're the downgrade.
I like Niners. Packers +11 at the Bills. Wowee. But it is the Bills. Bills coming off a bye. And the Packers, one of the things we had been talking about on a week-to-week basis is the Packers have not been downgraded enough. And they're still a top 10 team. Year-to-date basis, still only down 3 spots.
And it still predicting them as the 12th best team.
They're definitely a bottom 15 team right now.
Yeah. It would be a bold and ballsy Circa play. Which I think the Packers are going to be very popular. I'm not sure.
You like the Bills?
I have a slight lean towards the Bills.
I think I like the Bills.
11's a lot. But they can get pressure with 4. Rodgers has really been sensitive to pressure this year. Bakhtiari is not healthy. Yeah, I can get behind the Bills.
Again, when you look at drive quality too, again, because a lot of people are going to cite they were up 14-3. Again, one of which was a pick 6. So, I hear a lot of people citing the Packers are up 14-3 and they've been playing poorly, so they let it slip away. And one of those touchdowns was a pick 6, so it was 7-3.
Yeah.
And then, boom, right away, Washington came and did a drive for their own touchdown.
Yeah.
So it was and that's why the time-weighted average margin is Packers just +1. So at minimum, even from a time-weighted average margin perspective, it was essentially a flat game. But then from the earned points perspective, Washington decisively beat Green Bay. Speaks to potentially how bad Green Bay is.
Exactly. And you're right to point out that the market has not downgraded Green Bay.
Still at home. There's no weird, wonky travel or weird stuff that happens on the road. They're coming off a bye. They're getting healthier. And the Bills are pretty much the only team. The Bills are pretty much the only team that you can feel comfortable betting as a double-digit favorite in this season. Monday Night Football, last game on the slate. Bengals on the road, division foe, in Cleveland versus the Browns. Currently -3.5. This was -3, moved up a half point. People buying into the Bengals. People talking on Twitter, the Bengals aren't being appreciated properly. We have the Bengals ranked 2. I think maybe we're appreciating them more so than anybody is right now.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Having the Bengals ranked number 2, it's probably like giving Arjun like goosebumps of the negative kind. I can't bet the Bengals -3.5 on the road here.
You can't?
No.
I think I can lay the alt line here.
That's always different.
Yeah, I mean, I was using it as a proxy as like a convicted alt line, which makes me think that I like the 3.5. I'd rather bet the 6.5 and the 3.5, not because of a particular game angle, because I'm like convinced they're a lot better. The Browns have really struggled. We were talking about this last week about the like magic of Jacoby Brissett kind of being let up, and what's driving the number 2 ranking for the Bengals is their defense, which has been really terrific.
And Logan Wilson didn't even play. Is he going to be back here?
It's hard to know at the Wednesday. I've learned my lesson with the Wednesday injury report. And the Browns have been bleeding explosive plays on defense. They allow an extremely high ADOT. I just see Burrow as exactly the type of quarterback to manage in this spot, especially with his offense healthy and clicking.
It looks like Trey Hendrickson, who left last week's game against the Falcons, dealing with a stinger. Doesn't appear to be a serious injury. He could be back. Obviously, that would be big. And it looks like Logan Wilson is optimistic to be on the field soon.
No idea what that means.
Yeah.
But I think the Brissett wheels have come off. I think they'll continue to fall off. And the Bengals offense sets up perfectly for a match with the Browns defense. Exactly able to exploit the areas where the Browns are weakest.
Who's done this to the Browns?
We haven't played anyone good. Except for the Ravens last week. Got murdered by the Patriots. Chargers don't look all that impressive. And Falcons, Steelers, Jets, Panthers, great.
Yeah, the thing that worries me here is all these scores, regardless of the merit of the team, still a pro football team.
True.
Then any team can win on any given Sunday, as we're already seeing. They are not being decisively beat, X that Patriots game.
Yeah.
So they lost by 2, they lost by 3, they lost by 3, they lost by 1.
I see the Bengals as being a fundamentally different tier of opponent. Especially because the Ravens were not healthy. I wouldn't be too worried about the rush defense.
In a game that could potentially be close, where the Browns are playing close games, that hook could be everything. It's still a division game, still on the road. It's still Zach Taylor.
True.
In fact, one of the reasons why we've bet the Browns in the past is citing the coaching mismatch.
On the scripted stuff, the Browns are great when Stefanski has input, and the Bengals are terrible when Taylor has input. So it wouldn't be all that shocking to see the Browns kind of jump out to a lead. In which case, if you like the Bengals, I'd probably fit them live or on the alt.
Yeah.
Or both. Rather than
I like that game plan. Also, this is one of those standalone games.
Oh, yeah.
So this is where you could start to you have the time, the mental energy to really lean into some exotic
The
props.
mental energy is the key part. Yeah. I mean, it's all the best lines. Take all the money.
Oh, wow. So that next Thursday game, so Arjun's coming to town, coming to the big city.
That's right.
And we're going to watch the next Thursday game together. And we
Showed
get the pleasure of Eagles-Texans.
It's a privilege. It's a real privilege. Look, for me personally, it's if I'm out with you guys, it's almost better if it's not a compelling football game. Exactly. That's the privilege.
Pretty much every single time we go out, we're always watching some terrible game. We watched
one,
Bears-Washington.
That was a disaster. I don't think either of us were paying attention in the fourth quarter even.
And then Patriots.
But I will remember the Chargers-Chiefs game that we watched.
Yes, that's true.
That was a great game.
That was a good one. True. I guess before we go, let's just quickly what do we think are our top 5? Kind of, again, preliminary, it's not final.
I'm going to table the Ravens Bucs, even though I like that play. I'm fine with the Jaguars, Patriots, the Dolphins, the Cardinals, the Niners, the Bills.
Okay, so we definitely have a handful of games. Yeah. I definitely like Niners. I definitely like Bills. Again, the Bills line over time, who knows? Maybe it scares me off. But as of right now, I'm feeling confident. Bills, Niners.
Dolphins, Cardinals, Patriots.
Yes. Dolphins. Again, the Lions have been sold off like so much last couple of weeks. Again, now we got the Lions being priced as one of the worst teams in the NFL. And I still don't want to forget that the Lions are good at backdoors. They haven't done it the last 2 weeks. And the Dolphins, one of the things we've talked about on the Dolphins, betting them as well, is this is not a team that, like, they should be really explosive and they should be able to, like, drop 30 at any point in time, but they don't.
Yeah, only against their Hiffens. The reason I really like this spot is with the matchup angles, but I think he makes some compelling points.
Patriots, I'm with you on Patriots. And I want to be with you on the Jags, but we're talking about butthurt. My butt is destroyed.
Oh, I'm destroyed. I'm not, by the way, I'm much more butthurt on the Patriots. Way too exposed. I knew I was exposed and just stubborn.
Yeah. Sometimes in those games, you have such high conviction that, like, once the game gets out of hand, it, like, catches you by surprise.
It really catches you by surprise. And I was getting haughty. I was like, oh, man, I got the Bears first quarter. I got the alt line at the perfect time. I got everything looked good heading into, like, right before the half. You got to have some humility.
Yeah, if you got the Bears first quarter and then you call the swing, and then we got the Patriots, like, plus 3.5 when they opened the game -8, you're talking about line value. Going through key numbers, 7, 3, 0, plus 3. You're feeling good.
Yeah.
And didn't matter.
But it will all be made up for if we take them and they cover against the Jets.
Yeah, unless they lose versus the Jets, then it's going to be getting you twice.
Yeah. I might have to have a Joe Flacco jersey on stream.
The one thing that gives me a little bit of a yellow flag in this one is the Patriots, again, -1, and now it's up to -2.5. It's not going through any key numbers, so it's not a huge move. But the fact that there's optimism still, that people are writing off that Bears-Patriots game as just noise. It happens. And I was hoping the market would sell off a little bit on the Patriots, give us a little bit more value here, maybe even swing the other way. When we look at the market consensus power rankings, Patriots still ranked 13th. So higher than what we think we would have them fundamentally. And then drive quality has them at 15th. And I think personally we would probably have them ranked even lower. But I think, we have some things to work with. Optimistic. Gonna bounce back from the 2 and 3. We're tied with the market right now in Circa, but we're going to leap past. We're almost out of October. In fact, will we be out of October? No, we won't. So maybe one more bad week. No more bad weeks.
No, just those.
All right, thanks everyone for listening. That was good stuff. We got through a lot of content there. Got through the whole NFL Week 8 slate. Thanks for joining. Thanks for chatting with us. We'll see you Sunday on Game Trade.
That's right.
Take care, everyone. And that's closing bell.